We're in a the reason I'm on it today is we're in a crucial time. In many ways, we're at the end of what we know as the American empire. So if you're going to sit here and just have, an entertaining time, like my family, this is so entertaining, I got so much data, but you don't do anything different, then you're wasting my time and your time, and you're probably going to get smashed in the next few years. You'll have an opportunity. All professionals have mentors. So if you're just going to sit there and listen and take the data in, then you may as well join the rest of my family. Because they're not doing anything different. They live in a little bandwidth, their little happy little bandwidth, making 100,000 a year. The Federal Reserve Bank is ripping us off blind. And you sit there, I got such good information today. You're wasting your time and your family's time. So with that said, end of this program, we'll be talking about how you can step it up and take some action that's different. Because I am quite adamant about this. So the reason we have this coaching programs available to you is so that you can take action. You can do something different. Even when I was flying in Vietnam, we had coaches. We had advanced pilots teaching us how to fly better. That's how we survived. So I'm adamant about this. I'm sick and tired of talking to people who just soak in data, but don't do anything different. So I'm happy to say I've made more money than ever before this year. I hope you have too. But if you haven't, you better do something different. I've never made so much money this year than ever before. So anyway, this is not an ordinary time. So we're a very special guest today. Dear friend of mine, I got through school sitting next to the smartest girl in the class. And her name was Sylvia. And I was sat next to Sylvia, and every time they needed an answer, I leaned over and I asked Sylvia. In school, that's called cheating. In capitalism, that's called cooperation. So I'm always cooperative, and I'm always honored to have Nomi Prins here because she understands this is a woman of action. She has done it. She's not sitting there in a classroom at MIT or Harvard studying academic or finance theory. She's actually worked on Wall Street. She's traveled the world. She's checked out the banks, the central banks of the world. She knows what she's talking about. And I read her book and it blew me away. I was sitting up in in Alaska, reading her book going, oh my God. But she knows what goes on behind the scenes of that fake guy, Powell and Bernanke, all these central bankers. And you listen to CNBC and Fox News and all this, don't fight the Fed. Well, you should fight the Fed because they're ripping you off. So I'm very happy to have Nomi here because she actually takes action, more than most academics do, and she knows what she's talking about. So we're going to have a great discussion today on why the Fed is one of the biggest criminal organizations going. It is criminal what they're doing. You see, when Biden shut down the XL pipeline, what that did was create inflation. The first thing they do is increase the price of oil. When you increase the price of oil, you cause inflation. And when you cause inflation, thank you, Jesus, but I get richer. The rich get richer with inflation. Unfortunately, for those who are the working class, the employees, the middle class, you pay higher taxes. And as you know, I don't pay taxes legally. It makes life almost impossible for the poor. The poor go to the store, and what they were paying $5 for is now $7. And then they demand higher wages. And the more higher the wages, the less competitive America gets as a capitalist nation. So with that, I'm very honored to have a dear friend of mine, one of the smartest people I know is Nomi Prins. If you want to find out what's going on in the central banks. And so that's why you should listen to this program. At the end of the program, sign up so you can take action because they're ripping us off. So welcome to the program, Nomi. But I'm just going to tell people what I know, and I invite you to say what you know because you traveled the world. Would you tell us what you found out, or why you traveled the world to see the central banks, visit the central banks?
So Robert, and again, it's always great to talk to you. I always appreciate the opportunity. I learn as much as you say you learn, so that's awesome. And the fact that we can share it with all of the people that need this information, it is really important. And when you talk about you having the best year, but you can still balance that with understanding that there are poor people out there that can do better, and that you're basically opening your arms to them. I think that's a really special, important thing that you do and have been doing for so many years. So thank you for sharing your time with me.
Inflation makes life harder.
That's right.
On the working class.
That's right. So the reason I travel, and it's actually a part of traveling to central banks, is also traveling to countries and seeing how people are actually living and how they're impacted by things like price inflation for numbers of years. I mean, I started talking to central banks in the 90s. I didn't just start when everybody started paying attention. I've been doing this for decades. And what I've discovered as things have evolved is the power of central banks around the world, whether that's the People's Bank of China, the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, and of course, the Federal Reserve has only increased. Talk about inflation. Their power inflation has gone off the charts, particularly since the pandemic. Now, it was already very high since the financial crisis. What the Fed can do is create money out of nothing. Now, people say that's electronic, that's printing money. They're not printing. They are fabricating. They're manufacturing money that has no connection to actual worth, to actual value, and certainly to the actual economy. And the reason they are able to do this, one, because Wall Street and basically Washington created the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 to enable them to have that power to help Wall Street and Washington to look good, because Wall Street has helped when it needs it, but also because there was never been a limitation to how much fabrication of money the Fed can do. And every time you fabricate money, I can't, you can't, we make money, right? That's different than fabricating it out of nothing. You're investing in real estate, it has a return, you bank it, you move on. That's doing something actual. The Fed doesn't do that, right? The Fed creates it from nowhere. And the problem with that is the more that money is pushed into the system without an actual source, without having done anything to get there, right? The more that happens, the more devalued money actually is. And so what happens is we have all of, I call them distortions, between financial assets, paper assets, and physical assets. Whether they be what people actually have to put in their tanks, like you're talking about the high price of fuel, whether it is gold, whether it's copper, whether it is real estate, these are physical assets. And they are basically hampered by what the Fed is doing by blowing up money. And it's not just the Fed. This is something that's happened throughout the world since the financial crisis, and then the compounded effect of the pandemic. There is $31 trillion of fabricated money attached to no economy, to no investment, fabricated money, just with the four main central banks of the world: the Federal Reserve, People's Bank of China, European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, just four. If you add all the other ones in there who follow the Fed, who want to basically do what the Fed is doing to basically incur favor on that basis, it's $41 trillion of just fabricated money that deflates the value of money. We've inflated the prices of real assets, and that's where this distortion has gotten just so out of control.
Right. What Nomi's talking about here, if I produce this marker here, I'm producing a product and I sell it. That's money. But they don't even have to produce this. They just produce the money.
Right.
And again, it's what Nomi's talking about is 1913 was the Federal Reserve Act, but it was also the start of the IRS.
Right.
Because the dollar and taxes go hand in hand. And so that's why I say the rich get richer, the middle class pays more taxes, and the poor starve, because food is a tangible asset. And, I have more than enough money, but I'm in shock. I was at Safeway last time going, how do people afford this stuff? So that's why, I love and trust Nomi, because she understands how the central banks operate. And central banks, isn't central banking more Marxist than capitalist, Nomi?
Central banking, and particularly with the Fed at the leadership of that hierarchy of all the central banks in the world, is again not working, and it's also not investing. So it's doing really nothing to produce the money it has produced. Like, again, I mentioned it was fabricating it. And as a result, it distorts everybody's relationship to the economy. It is what increases anger amongst poor people and amongst the middle class, because their money isn't going far enough to basically pay for the inflated prices of the things they need in their lives to move forward or just to even stay in place. And that increases the anger. And you see this throughout the world. It's not just even in the United States, but it emanates. It does emanate from the Federal Reserve, because other central banks really do take their cues now. I mean, they're not necessarily supposed to, but in these last few years in particular, and since the financial crisis, this explosion of money creation has been really headed by the Fed with no limitations. You talk about, Robert, that there are limitations put upon people in terms of how they can potentially behave, or what they can do, or whatever that is. There are no limitations put upon the Fed. And as such, they are basically sort of, they are a criminal organization because they're not involved in the creation of anything real. And as a result, it hurts people who are in that actual real world. And this is something that I don't see changing, because there's no beatback. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, right? Apparently his wealth has gone from $25 million to $60 million in just the last 2 years. Now you sit back and you're like, okay, fine, Powell, awesome, great for you. But how did he do that? Well, basically, he's at the head of the organization that can actually create its own wealth out of nowhere. So when the Federal Reserve has a policy of creating money, it basically gets inhaled by Wall Street. It gets borrowed against, debt accumulates. The financial markets do rise, but it's all basically, predicated on this paper creation. And then Powell is in this position where he can create the money that allows him to become rich without actually doing anything but creating the money, right? So it's this complete circle whereby Powell gets rich, and he's invested in the same companies that he's basically providing free money to. It's a brilliant gig. I mean, if you think about it, I'm sure you work way harder, Robert, to make your money than Powell is doing right now by just putting some policy in place that he has 100% power to be able to do.